My sister smiled while handing out lavender bridesmaid dresses to everyone else. Soft lavender, elegant satin, perfectly tailored. Then she handed me mine. Bright orange, 3 sizes too big. One shoulder hanging loose like a curtain. It was the only one left, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The bridesmaids laughed awkwardly. My mother told me not to ruin the wedding with drama. So I wore it. I stood through photos, through whispers, through strangers staring at me like I was part of a joke. But during the reception, the groom's grandmother walked straight toward me, took my hand, and said 6 words that destroyed the entire wedding. I knew something was wrong the second I walked into the bridal suite. 7 lavender dresses hung neatly beside the mirrors. Soft satin, elegant sleeves, perfectly matched bouquets placed beneath each one. Everything looked like something from a wedding magazine. My sister Vanessa stood near the makeup station smiling while the bridesmaids admired their dresses and took photos for Instagram. "Yours is over there," she said casually. I followed her finger toward the corner. At first, I honestly thought it was a joke. The dress hanging alone wasn't lavender. It was bright orange. Not soft peach. Not muted gold. Traffic cone orange. And it was enormous. At least 3 sizes too big. One sleeve drooped halfway off the hanger, and the waist looked stretched wide enough for 2 people. The room went strangely quiet behind me. One bridesmaid awkwardly looked away. Another pretended to check her phone. Vanessa walked over smiling like everything was perfectly normal. "It was the only one left in your size," she said loudly. I stared at her. "My size." She shrugged. "You said you'd lost weight recently." I guessed. A couple girls exchanged uncomfortable looks. My mother immediately stepped in before I could answer. "Claire, please don't start drama today." Drama. That word again. The same word they used anytime Vanessa hurt someone, and I reacted to it. I picked up the dress slowly. The fabric felt cheap compared to the others. Even the material was different. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. "But honestly," she said, "orange is such a confident color. Most people couldn't pull it off." The bridesmaids forced tiny laughs. I felt heat crawling into my face. Not because the dress looked ridiculous. Because I suddenly realized this had been planned. Carefully. Deliberately. Every lavender dress beside mine looked graceful and elegant. Mine looked humiliating. And somehow everyone in that room knew it except me. I turned toward the mirror holding the oversized orange fabric against my body. For the first time that morning, I understood something clearly. My sister didn't want me standing beside her at this wedding. She wanted me standing beneath her. Vanessa had been competing with me for as long as I could remember. Not openly. That would have been easier. She did it quietly. Small comments. Tiny humiliations. Little moments designed to remind everyone which daughter mattered more. When I was 14 and got compliments at a family party, she cried afterward and said people ignored her all night. My parents spent 2 hours comforting her. When I made honor roll in high school, Vanessa suddenly announced she wanted to quit volleyball because nobody appreciated her talents. Guess whose feelings became the family emergency? Even birthdays somehow turned into celebrations for her. If I got attention, Vanessa found a way to pull it back. And my parents always defended it with the same sentence. That's just how she is. Over time, I learned something dangerous. Keeping peace usually meant making myself smaller. So I did. I apologized first, stayed quiet, accepted jokes that hurt more than I admitted. Then last year, everything changed. After a painful breakup, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I lost weight, started therapy, changed my style, started smiling more. People noticed. Apparently Vanessa noticed too. At the bridal shower, 3 different relatives told me I looked amazing. During dress fittings, one vendor accidentally assumed I was the younger sister. Vanessa laughed it off publicly. But afterward, she barely spoke to me the entire drive home. Even her compliments started sounding sharp. Must be nice suddenly getting attention. At rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding, her college friend Jenna leaned toward me while everyone was distracted. "I think she's jealous of you," she whispered carefully. I almost laughed. Of me. Jenna looked toward the bridal table where Vanessa sat smiling too brightly while guests complimented the decorations. She acts different whenever people compliment you. I shook my head immediately.
No.
Vanessa just gets stressed. But even while saying it, I remembered the orange dress hanging alone in that bridal suite. And deep down, a horrible feeling started settling inside me. Maybe this wedding wasn't the beginning of something beautiful for my sister. Maybe it was one final competition she needed to win. By the time the photographer started organizing bridal party pictures, I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. The ballroom garden looked stunning. White roses climbed the stone archways. Crystal lights shimmered above the dance floor. Every bridesmaid stood glowing in soft lavender satin. Then there was me, bright orange, standing in the middle of every photo like a warning sign. Okay, bridesmaids closer together, the photographer said carefully. Vanessa immediately adjusted positions. Claire, maybe stand on the far side. Far side became farther with every photo. Near the edge, then behind someone, then partially hidden beside a flower arrangement. Like she was trying to erase me while still keeping me visible enough to embarrass me. A few guests walking past slowed down to stare. One older woman actually asked if I worked for the venue. I forced a smile and said nothing. My mother noticed my expression immediately. Please don't pout in the pictures, she whispered sharply. Today isn't about you. I looked at her in disbelief. I wasn't the one turning family photos into a humiliation ritual, but arguing would only make me look emotional, sensitive, difficult. Exactly what Vanessa wanted. Meanwhile, my sister transformed into perfection whenever cameras pointed at her, laughing, touching my arm affectionately, calling me sweet sister, loud enough for guests to hear. Anyone watching from a distance would think we were close. But every time the photographer lowered the camera, her smile vanished instantly. At one point, she leaned close and murmured quietly, "The orange actually distracts from your shoulders." So this worked out. I felt my stomach twist. Across the courtyard, I noticed someone watching us. The groom's grandmother. Elegant, silver hair. Perfect posture. Sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't smiling. She kept looking from Vanessa, to me, to the oversized orange dress. Then during another round of photos, I overheard two guests whisper behind me. Why would the bride do that to her own sister? And for the first time all day, I realized people were starting to notice this wasn't an accident. The reception ballroom glowed like something out of a movie. Golden candles flickered across every table. A violinist played softly near the stage. Guests laughed beneath hanging chandeliers while servers carried trays of champagne through the crowd. And somehow I still felt impossible to miss. The orange dress reflected every light in the room. I stayed mostly silent during dinner, praying attention would move somewhere else. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Halfway through the reception, the DJ tapped the microphone. Before dessert, he announced, the bride would like to say a few words about her bridesmaids. The room applauded warmly. Vanessa stood gracefully, champagne glass in hand, smiling like the perfect bride. She thanked each bridesmaid one by one. Emily for planning the shower. Rachel for calming her panic attacks. Jenna for helping with decorations. Everyone clapped after every name. Then she reached me. And of course, she said brightly, my sister Claire. A spotlight of attention suddenly landed on me. Vanessa laughed softly. At least the orange dress made sure nobody accidentally confused her for the bride. A few guests laughed automatically. Others didn't. I felt my chest tighten so hard I could barely breathe. Vanessa kept smiling while sipping champagne like she'd said something harmless. My father laughed louder than anyone else. My mother shook her head toward me immediately, silently warning me not to react. Don't ruin the wedding. Don't embarrass the family. Don't make this difficult. The same rules I'd lived under my entire life. I forced myself to smile weakly while heat burned behind my eyes. Across the room, I noticed the groom staring down at his plate. Embarrassed. Even some bridesmaids looked uncomfortable now. But Vanessa seemed energized by the attention. For the first time all day, her smile looked real. Like humiliating me publicly had finally relaxed her. I lasted through dessert.
Barely.
The second people started gathering near the dance floor, I quietly grabbed my purse from under the table. Nobody noticed. Or maybe nobody cared enough to stop me. I kept my head down and walked toward the ballroom exit, desperate to escape before the tears finally came. Then I heard a calm, elderly voice behind me. Claire. I turned slowly. The groom's grandmother was standing beside the doorway, watching me carefully. I stopped walking. The ballroom music continued faintly behind us, while guests laughed somewhere near the dance floor, completely unaware my entire body was holding itself together by pure force. The groom's grandmother stood beside the doorway, with one hand resting lightly on her silver cane. Up close, she looked even more intimidating. Not because she was harsh, because she looked like the kind of woman who noticed everything.
You were leaving, she said gently.
I forced a small smile. I didn't want to make a scene. Her eyes moved slowly toward the orange dress. No, she replied calmly. Someone else already did that. For a second, I couldn't speak. Nobody had acknowledged it all day. Not directly. Not honestly. The grandmother stepped closer and lowered her voice slightly. What your sister did was deliberate. The words hit me harder than I expected, because hearing someone else say it made it real. I looked down immediately, embarrassed by the sudden tears burning behind my eyes. She's just stressed, I whispered automatically. The grandmother gave me a long look. Claire, happy women don't humiliate their sisters in public. Silence settled between us. Then she asked quietly, do you know why Vanessa fears you? I blinked in confusion. Fears me? She absolutely does. I almost laughed at the idea. Vanessa had always been the confident one, the loud one, the beautiful one. Meanwhile, I'd spent most of my life apologizing for taking up space. The grandmother studied my face carefully. Women who feel secure don't need to shrink other women to feel important. My chest tightened painfully. Nobody had ever spoken to me like this before. Not with honesty. Not without dismissing everything afterward. Inside the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted near the dance floor. The grandmother glanced toward the noise, then back at me. You can leave if you want, she said softly. But if I were you, she paused. I'd stay 5 more minutes. I frowned slightly. Why? For the first time all evening, a faint knowing smile crossed her face. Because some lessons are better delivered publicly. I don't know why I listened to her. Maybe because she was the first person all day who made me feel seen. Maybe because part of me wanted anyone to finally acknowledge what had happened. So I stayed. The grandmother gently guided me back toward the reception hall while music floated through the ballroom. Nobody noticed us at first. Vanessa was near the center of the room taking photos with guests, smiling brightly like the evening had gone perfectly. The second she saw me return, I noticed surprise flash across her face. Probably because she expected me to leave quietly. Like always. The grandmother walked slowly toward the head table. Then she picked up a fork and tapped it lightly against her champagne glass. The sound rang across the ballroom. Conversation stopped almost immediately. The groom straightened in confusion. My parents looked startled. Vanessa forced another polished smile. Oh, good. She laughed nervously. Another speech. The grandmother remained calm. Elegant.
Composed.
Absolutely unshaken. She looked directly at Vanessa for several long seconds before speaking. A happy woman, she said quietly, does not humiliate her sister to feel beautiful. The entire ballroom went silent. Not awkward silent. Devastated silent. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. My mother's face went pale. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The grandmother continued calmly. I have watched Claire carry herself with grace all evening while being treated cruelly in front of hundreds of people. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted her. When a woman feels secure, she continued, she lifts the people beside her. She does not try to make them smaller. Several guests slowly lowered their eyes. Even the bridesmaids looked frozen now. Vanessa finally let out a small laugh, but it sounded shaky. Grandma, it was just a dress. No, the grandmother interrupted softly. It was a decision. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Across the room, I noticed guests exchanging uncomfortable looks.
People understood now.
Really understood. Vanessa's eyes suddenly filled with panic instead of confidence. Without another word, she placed her champagne glass down roughly, turned around, and walked quickly out of the ballroom while stunned silence followed behind her. For several long seconds after Vanessa left, nobody in the ballroom moved. The music had stopped. The servers stood frozen beside their trays. Even the photographer slowly lowered his camera. It felt like the entire wedding had suddenly cracked open. Then finally, the groom exhaled heavily and rubbed a hand across his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. At first, I didn't realize he was speaking to me. He stepped away from the head table and looked directly at me in front of everyone. I should have said something earlier. The room stayed painfully silent. Vanessa's mother, my mother, immediately stood. "Daniel, this has all been blown completely out of proportion." "No," he interrupted gently. "It hasn't." That shocked everyone more than the grandmother's speech. Because for the first time all evening, someone from Vanessa's side stopped protecting her. Daniel looked exhausted now, embarrassed. "I asked Vanessa about the dress this morning," he admitted quietly. "She told me Claire approved it herself." Several bridesmaids exchanged stunned looks. "She lied," Jenna said under her breath. My father shifted uncomfortably. "She's emotional right now," he muttered. "People are making assumptions." But the atmosphere had already changed. Guests weren't confused anymore. They were judging. Not me. Her. One bridesmaid finally stepped closer beside me. "For what it's worth," she whispered softly. "We all thought something felt wrong." Another nodded immediately after. The grandmother remained seated calmly near the dance floor, watching everything unfold without satisfaction or cruelty. Just certainty. Like she'd seen this kind of family dynamic before. My mother kept trying to force nervous smiles at nearby guests. "Families are complicated," she kept repeating awkwardly. But nobody really responded anymore. Because the truth was sitting openly in the center of the ballroom now, impossible to hide beneath flowers and music. And standing there in that ridiculous orange dress, surrounded by people finally seeing what I'd lived with for years, I felt something strange settle inside me. Not humiliation. Relief. For the first time in my life, someone had publicly chosen my side instead of Vanessa's. Later that night, pieces of the truth started fitting together in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. The orange dress had never been random. It started months earlier during wedding planning. At first, Vanessa acted normal, excited, affectionate, constantly posting bridal countdowns and Pinterest boards. But little things kept shifting whenever attention moved toward me. At the engagement dinner, one of Daniel's cousins told me I looked movie star pretty after my haircut. Vanessa disappeared to the bathroom for 20 minutes afterward. During cake testing, the bakery owner accidentally handed me the sample binder first, assuming I was the bride. Vanessa laughed publicly. But later in the parking lot she snapped at me for trying too hard. I remember staring at her in complete confusion. Trying too hard to do what? Exist? As the wedding got closer, her comments became sharper. "You've changed since losing weight. You suddenly love attention now. You never used to care how you looked." The strange part was I wasn't trying to compete with her at all. For the first time in years, I'd simply stopped hiding myself. That alone seemed to bother her. A week before the wedding, I even offered to step down as bridesmaid. I remember sitting across from her at lunch saying carefully, "If wedding stress is getting overwhelming, I can just attend as a guest." Vanessa immediately refused. Too quickly. "Oh my God, don't be dramatic," she laughed. At the time, I thought she wanted peace. Now I understood something much uglier. You can't publicly humiliate someone if they aren't standing beside you. Near the dessert table, the grandmother appeared quietly beside me again while guests continued whispering around the ballroom. "She's spent years measuring herself against you," she said softly. I shook my head. "That makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense," she replied calmly. "Some people confuse attention with worth." Across the room, I noticed my mother slipping into the hallway where Vanessa had disappeared earlier. The grandmother watched carefully before speaking again. "Cruel people rarely believe they're cruel," she said quietly. They usually believe they're protecting themselves. I was standing near the back hallway sipping water when my mother finally found me. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Not rushed. Annoyed. "There you are," she said quietly, pulling me farther from the ballroom entrance. What exactly was that out there? I stared at her. What was what? You know what? Her voice lowered immediately. Vanessa is already emotional, and now Daniel's grandmother has embarrassed her in front of everyone. I almost laughed from disbelief. Embarrassed her? My mother crossed her arms. "Claire, whether you intended it or not, you created tension tonight." There it was again. The same familiar twisting of reality. Vanessa humiliates me publicly. I react silently. And somehow I become the problem. I looked at my mother carefully, suddenly exhausted in a way I'd never felt before. She gave me an orange dress 3 sizes too big. My mother sighed dramatically. It was one dress. "No," I said quietly. "It was years." She blinked. I could actually see her preparing to dismiss me again. So before she could speak, something inside me finally snapped loose. "Do you know what I remember from my birthdays?" I asked calmly. Vanessa crying because someone complimented me. My mother's expression tightened. "Claire."
No.
"You always told me to stay quiet because that was easier than dealing with her." "That is not fair. Isn't it?" My voice never rose. That almost seemed to disturb her more. When I succeeded, she fell apart. When people noticed me, she got angry. And every single time, you asked me to shrink myself so she could feel comfortable. My mother looked stunned now, like hearing the truth spoken out loud sounded uglier than living inside it. "You're exaggerating." I shook my head slowly.
No.
I spent my whole life making myself smaller so Vanessa could feel bigger. Silence settled heavily between us. Behind the ballroom doors, music started playing again awkwardly, but neither of us moved. For the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for how deeply something hurt me. The ballroom never fully recovered after that. Even when the music restarted, it sounded forced. Conversations stayed quieter. Laughter became careful. People kept glancing toward the hallway where Vanessa had disappeared 20 minutes earlier. She locked herself in the bridal suite. One bridesmaid whispered near the bar. Daniel stood near the dance floor loosening his tie for what felt like the 10th time. He looked less like a groom now, and more like a man realizing something important far too late. My father kept trying to salvage the atmosphere. "Everybody relax," he announced loudly at one point. "Families have emotional moments." But nobody really listened anymore. Because emotional moments didn't explain the orange dress. The grandmother remained seated calmly at her table, occasionally sipping tea while guests quietly approached her with respectful nods. There was something powerful about the way she carried herself. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Certain. At one point, I finally sat beside her. "You didn't have to do that for me," I said softly. She looked toward the empty hallway before answering. "Yes," she replied calmly. "I did." I frowned slightly. She folded her hands together carefully. "When I was 22, my older sister cut my wedding dress before my ceremony because she thought I looked prettier than her." I stared at her in shock. "She told everyone it was an accident," the grandmother continued quietly. "And my family defended her because keeping peace felt easier than confronting cruelty." Something painful moved behind her eyes for only a second before disappearing again. I promised myself I would never stay silent watching another woman endure that kind of humiliation. Across the ballroom, Daniel suddenly began walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately. My stomach tightened immediately. When he reached the table, he looked exhausted. "There's something you deserve to know," he said quietly. The grandmother leaned back silently. Daniel rubbed a hand across his jaw before continuing. "This morning, Vanessa admitted the dress had to be specially altered." I froze. "She personally ordered the orange fabric months ago," he said carefully. "There never was a lavender dress in your size." For a second, the ballroom noise disappeared completely. The music,
The guests.
everything. Because hearing confirmation shattered the final piece of denial still left inside me. My chest tightened painfully. And before I could stop myself, tears finally spilled down my face while I realized my own sister had planned my humiliation months before the wedding even began. Nearly 40 minutes passed before Vanessa finally came back into the ballroom. Her mascara had been redone. Her smile had too. But this version looked fragile now. The room noticed immediately. Conversation softened as she returned to the head table beside Daniel, pretending the evening could still be repaired if everyone ignored the crack running through it. Then the DJ handed the microphone back to the groom's grandmother. A nervous ripple moved across the ballroom. Even Vanessa froze slightly. The grandmother stood slowly, smoothing one hand over her dark blue jacket before speaking. "I wasn't planning to give another toast tonight," she said calmly. "But marriage deserves honesty more than performance." The room went completely silent again. She turned toward Daniel first. "A good marriage is not built on beauty, status, or attention. It is built on kindness." Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. Then her gaze shifted gently toward Vanessa. "And kindness is most visible in how we treat the people closest to us." Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their drinks. The grandmother's voice never rose once. "That includes sisters." Vanessa stared at the floor now. "I have lived long enough," the grandmother continued, "to know that cruelty rarely begins loudly. Most cruelty begins quietly, through humiliation disguised as jokes, through exclusion disguised as accidents." Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. My mother looked completely pale. My father kept staring at the tablecloth like refusing eye contact might somehow erase the night. The grandmother looked around the ballroom carefully before speaking again. "Tonight, I watched one woman try very hard to make another woman feel small." Every word landed heavily. But dignity is a difficult thing to destroy when someone carries it naturally. My throat tightened instantly. Across the room, one bridesmaid quietly wiped tears from her face. The grandmother finally lifted her champagne glass slowly. "This family spent too many years protecting comfort over truth," she said softly. "That never creates peace. It only creates silence." Nobody clapped. Nobody interrupted. Because deep down, everyone understood she was right. Then finally, she turned directly toward me, not toward the bride.
Me.
And with the calmest voice in the room, she said, "Claire, never allow anyone to make you smaller so they can feel important." The ballroom stayed silent long after she lowered the microphone, because somehow her words felt bigger than the wedding itself. Vanessa stayed seated for almost a full minute after the grandmother finished speaking, completely motionless. The ballroom felt unbearably quiet now. Then suddenly, Vanessa pushed her chair back hard enough to scrape loudly against the floor. "I'm not a terrible person," she said shakily. Nobody answered. Her voice cracked immediately. "You all keep acting like I'm some monster over a stupid dress." Daniel looked at her carefully, but stayed silent. That silence seemed to affect her more than anything else had all night. Vanessa turned toward me suddenly. "You have no idea what it's like," she snapped. "Everywhere we went lately, people noticed you first." The room froze again. I stared at her in disbelief. At the bridal shower, Aunt Melissa wouldn't stop talking about how amazing you looked, she continued emotionally. During fittings, vendors kept assuming you were the bride. Even tonight people kept staring at you. "Because I was wearing orange," I said quietly. "That's not the point." Her voice echoed across the ballroom. For the first time all evening, she looked less angry than exhausted. Almost scared. "I just wanted one day where I felt special, without competing with you."
Competing.
The word hurt more than the dress somehow, because I had never been competing with her at all. I offered to step down from the wedding. I reminded her softly. "I know," she whispered. The ballroom stayed silent enough to hear glasses clink faintly somewhere near the bar. Vanessa looked down at her hands. "I ordered the dress months ago," she admitted finally. My chest tightened painfully. "I thought if you looked ridiculous," she swallowed hard, "then maybe people would stop comparing us." Several guests looked visibly stunned hearing her say it out loud. My mother covered her mouth quietly. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, like something inside him had finally broken. And suddenly Vanessa didn't look powerful anymore, just deeply insecure. The kind of insecurity that destroys people standing closest to it first. Daniel slowly stood from his chair, without saying a word. Then he walked away toward the empty dance floor alone while the entire ballroom watched him go. The wedding technically continued after that. The band started playing again. Servers brought out coffee and cake. A few relatives even attempted dancing. But the atmosphere never recovered. It felt like everyone was pretending to attend a celebration that had already quietly collapsed. Vanessa stayed near the head table, barely speaking. Daniel returned eventually, but something about him had changed. Earlier that evening he'd looked proud,
Certain.
excited. Now he looked emotionally distant, polite but absent. Like he was seeing his new wife clearly for the first time and didn't know what to do with the truth. Guests began leaving much earlier than expected. I overheard whispers everywhere. She planned it. Over her own sister? That grandmother was right. For once, the whispers weren't about me. My parents looked exhausted now. My father avoided eye contact with almost everyone. My mother kept forcing brittle smiles while thanking guests for coming. But years of carefully protecting Vanessa had finally failed publicly. And there was no way to quietly repair it anymore. Near the dessert table, Jenna hugged me tightly before leaving. "I'm sorry none of us said something sooner," she whispered. Another bridesmaid nodded beside her. "You handled tonight better than most people would have." The strange thing was, I didn't even feel angry anymore. Not fully. Mostly I felt relieved. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room I'd been trapped inside my entire life. The family dynamic everyone pretended not to notice had finally become impossible to ignore. And somehow that truth felt freeing. As I gathered my purse near the ballroom exit, the grandmother approached me one last time. She pressed a folded piece of paper gently into my hand. Her phone number. "If you ever need someone honest to talk to," she said softly, "call me." Emotion tightened painfully in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled warmly. Then her expression softened even more before she added, "Claire, you deserve people who celebrate you, not people who need you diminished to feel valuable." I looked down at the ridiculous orange dress one final time. For the first time all night, I no longer felt ashamed wearing it. 6 months after the wedding, my life looked completely different. Quieter, healthier, smaller in some ways, but honest. I started therapy 2 weeks after the wedding. At first, I thought we'd spend every session talking about Vanessa and the orange dress. Instead, my therapist spent more time asking why I believed keeping peace mattered more than protecting myself. That question stayed with me for months. Meanwhile, the family fallout kept spreading quietly. Vanessa and Daniel were still technically married, but barely. From what I heard through relatives, they fought constantly now. Not really about the dress anymore. About trust. Daniel apparently struggled to forget how easily Vanessa had planned humiliation while pretending innocence afterward. My parents still tried defending her at first, but it became harder once everyone knew the truth. Especially after several guests privately contacted me afterward apologizing for staying silent during the wedding. For years, my family had controlled the story by making me sound oversensitive. That stopped working once other people witnessed it themselves. The strangest part of those months wasn't losing closeness with my family. It was gaining closeness somewhere unexpected. The grandmother called me every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we talked about books. Sometimes relationships. Sometimes nothing important at all. But every conversation left me feeling lighter.
Scene.
One afternoon while having coffee together, she smiled across the table and said, "You know what healing looks like?" I shook my head. "It looks like no longer needing cruel people to finally approve of you." That sentence changed something inside me. Slowly, I started rebuilding parts of myself I'd abandoned years earlier. I joined a photography class, started traveling on weekends, made friends who didn't treat confidence like arrogance. And eventually, the orange dress stopped feeling humiliating in my memory. Instead, it became proof. Proof that I had survived years of shrinking myself for people who only felt comfortable when I disappeared. Then one rainy Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text I hadn't expected. "Vanessa, can we meet?" For a long moment, I simply stared at the message glowing quietly across my screen. I met Vanessa at a small coffee shop near the lake the following Saturday. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked different. Still beautiful. Still polished. But quieter somehow. Like life had finally exhausted the part of her that constantly needed to prove something. "You look good," she said awkwardly after we sat down. I smiled faintly. "So do you." That wasn't entirely true. There were dark circles beneath her eyes now. Tension around her mouth. The kind people carry when they're forced to confront themselves honestly for the first time. The waitress brought our drinks and disappeared again. Vanessa stared down at her coffee for several long seconds before finally speaking. "Daniel moved out last month." I didn't react immediately. "I'm sorry," I said softly. She nodded once. "He said he doesn't know if he trusts me anymore." Silence settled carefully between us. Outside the cafe windows, rain moved across the sidewalk in silver streaks. Then Vanessa laughed bitterly under her breath. "It sounds stupid now," she admitted. "Destroying my marriage over a dress." "It wasn't about the dress," I said quietly. Her eyes lifted toward mine immediately. For the first time in years, neither of us looked away. "No," she whispered. "It wasn't." Emotion tightened in my chest unexpectedly, because suddenly she sounded less defensive and more honest than I'd ever heard her before. "I spent my whole life comparing myself to you," she admitted slowly, "even when nobody else was comparing us." I stayed silent. "You were always calmer, easier to love. People felt comfortable around you." She swallowed hard. "And whenever I felt insecure, I needed to feel bigger than someone." The honesty hurt, but strangely, it also freed something inside me. "I spent most of my life trying not to threaten you," I admitted quietly. "I made myself smaller constantly." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears instantly. "I know." For a while, neither of us spoke. There was no dramatic apology. No perfect reconciliation. Some damage doesn't disappear in one conversation. But for the first time in our lives, we were speaking honestly instead of performing family roles. When we finally stood to leave, Vanessa looked at me quietly and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be okay?" I thought about the wedding, the years before it, the orange dress. Then I answered truthfully, "I think we finally have a chance to be real." And walking back through the rain afterward, I realized something important. The orange dress stopped humiliating me the moment I understood it was never really about the dress.